Obviously, since this is a mental health podcast, there are some disclaimers I have to go through. First of all, I am not a medical professional. I am just a girl with a passion and years of experience and a psych degree. So please take what you want, leave the rest, and speak with a medical professional if you do need medical advice. Also, this is a very real podcast. It will be uncensored. I will try and bleep out some cuss words, but I cannot guarantee that all will be. With that, if you have any little ears around, please be cognizant. And also, I will be speaking on some pretty sensitive topics. So please listen only when and if it feels right for you. Finally, I do have the mental health hotline. If you need to speak with anyone, they are around 24/7, and their number is 844-685-7030. I used to work for them. They're super helpful. Please give them a call. Welcome back, everyone, to Be Well with Alex. I must be doing something right if you're here for the second episode. Today, we'll be talking a bit about my story and how I got here. It's funny because I had separated this into two parts. I thought it was going to be a really long story, but I just did take one of this and I realized it's not as long as I thought. So it might be another short one, but that's okay. You'll get a chunk today and then you'll get left on a cliffhanger and you'll get the second chunk next episode. So I decided to talk about my story because you might be thinking to yourself, why the fuck, Alex, would I want to listen to you? Well, my mom always has an analogy that I absolutely love. And that analogy is, would you rather have someone with a fancy degree, but only 1 year of experience operating on you? Or would you rather have someone who maybe didn't go to the best school, but has over 20 plus years of experience operating on you? I don't know about you, but I would prefer the latter. I want to know that they have been on that table and they know what they're doing. So I am that person. I am the latter. I, again, am not a medical professional, but I have lived experience of mental health and many aspects of mental health, which you'll learn about today. So I want to be as natural as possible, and I don't want to rely too heavily on notes. But for these next two episodes, I am going to read more off of the script that I have here, just because with 20 plus years, I want to keep it brief. I want to give you as much detail as possible while also not oversharing, because I tend to do that. And I will try my hardest not to be robotic in that. But again, I did write down my story just so I don't leave anything out, or I'm not like, oh wait, I forgot to talk about this. So let's get into it, shall we? My first diagnosis was when I was 7. I have always been a very energetic, curious, bubbly kid and experiential learner. I like to get my hands dirty. Even today, I tell people that all the time. I'm like, don't show me. Well, show me once, but then let me test it out and let me make the mistakes for myself and see what I'm doing wrong and fix them for myself. And you kind of guide me as I go. But standardized school is not like that. Most of the time, your teachers are lecturing. Even when you're in elementary school, yeah, they give you like arts and crafts to do. But a lot of it felt like busy work to me. And I needed to know the why behind things. So with that, and due to the fact that my handwriting was atrocious, I mean, I would switch letters. Words would start moving away from the margin or start crossing over into other lines if I was writing on lined paper. It was really bad. And so with those two things combined, teachers thought that I needed to be placed in, quote, slow classes, end quote. Luckily, I had a phenomenal teacher at the time who knew that I was smarter than my writing was letting on and my attention span was letting on. So she held a parent-teacher conference with my parents and she said, look, Alex has a crazy high vocabulary. She's reading on, I don't remember what level it was, but a couple years beyond my age. I don't think that she should be put in slow classes. My parents also knew this already. And with that, my parents decided to take me to a specialist. And thank God for that, because I don't know what kids do who don't have a supportive, loving family or teachers. If they had put me in slow classes, I think I would have always believed that I was dumb, that I was not smart enough to succeed, that nothing would ever change. And I think I would definitely not be where I am today. But my parents took me to that specialist, and very quickly I was diagnosed with ADHD. But the specialist also introduced something to my parents called dysgraphia. And the way that I explain dysgraphia to people who have never heard of it before is it's very similar to dyslexia, which is more widely known. Dyslexia is where you switch letters when you read. Dysgraphia is more of an output disorder, so you have a very hard time getting your thoughts on paper, and you tend to switch letters when you write. So for me, I had all these ideas in my head, and I was a very imaginative kid. I loved writing short stories. I loved any creative work, and I loved work when I knew the why behind the work. But I had a very hard time getting all these ideas in my head out on paper. And when I did, it just looked like chicken scratch. So I was able to work with a tutor every day after school while my kids went, while my friends went and played sports or did clubs. I was working with a tutor, which again, I hated, but now I'm so grateful for because you would never be able to tell that I have dysgraphia today unless I get really tired. Then my handwriting starts slanting again and I start switching letters again. But otherwise, you wouldn't be able to tell. And that's because I worked with a tutor that my parents got me. So with that, I was eventually able to move up into the advanced classes. And I did realize that I was smarter than I had originally believed. Then I get into middle school where the kids and puberty are just relentless. I gained weight in every area but my chest, which to me was the area that mattered. I was experimenting with crazy makeup, like 70s style, a lot of bright colors. I had every lip smackers known to man, which no shame in that. In fact, lip smackers, if you want to sponsor me, bring it on. But it was not in a cute way. Like I'm wearing blue eyeshadow today to commemorate the day. And I think hopefully I know how to do my makeup a bit cuter today, but back then, it was bad. It looked like I had drawn it on with crayon. Anyways, I had also got fitted for braces and glasses at the time, and I was a total nerd, so it fit the mold, and not in like a cute nerdy way. Like none of this was cute, basically. And on top of the swirling emotions, I was heavily bullied, both mentally and physically. One student and one teacher in particular just made my life a living hell. And then I also avoided the mean cliques, the boys and girls in the cafeteria, by eating my lunch in the library. I had the most wonderful librarian, and we weren't technically allowed to eat in the library, but she would lay out all of my sci-fi books for me back there, hidden in an area where all the cool kids couldn't see, and I would sit back there and eat my PB&J, and that was just my peace during the day because the rest of my days were living hell. It got so bad to the point where I, as a 12-year-old girl, started experiencing suicidal ideation, but I, of course, didn't have a term for it at that time. I just knew that things were so bad at school that I just felt worthless. I didn't want to be here anymore. I don't think my parents knew the extent of it at the time. I don't think they knew it was that bad, but they did know that I was anxious to go to school and I was having the worst panic attacks. So I went back to a specialist who diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder, which was treated with medication and cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'll talk more about CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, in other episodes. In high school, I decided to make a change. The first step was to, quote, fix, end quote, my body. So I trained with a cross-country team every morning at 5 a.m. over the summer before my freshman year, and not for the right reasons. I was determined to get a boyfriend. As the first boy I asked out in 6th grade, he just laughed in my face, and I never fully recovered. I honestly just wanted a guy to think I was cute. Plus, this was going to be a new school. I had gone to a K-8 before, so this was going to be new kids, fresh meat. I wanted to go in as the cool girl. I didn't have to be the most popular, but if I was popular, that'd be pretty cool too. I still thought I was too nerdy to be popular back then. So naturally, the first boy who asked me out cheated on me, solidifying that I was still a piece of shit. And my family still jokes about Mr. Snapback. He didn't even shake my dad's hand when he came and asked me to do the movies. He was just a terrible person and he cheated on me. So I gave up on the male species and I started investing very heavily in myself. Although, of course, I did have a couple really good long-term relationships in high school eventually. So shout out to you guys. If you're listening, you know who you are. Anyways, I ended up being a really good runner, which shouldn't have come as a surprise considering my dad is also a really good runner. But to me, I never thought I'd be the athletic type. So now I was good at something. Not only was I good at something, I was being recognized for it. I ended up going from huffing and puffing, trying to run a mile and acting like it was World War III and I was dying the summer before my freshman year, to getting on varsity, having college scouts already looking at me, and having my name in some local newspapers. So I felt like a mini celebrity. But still, after feeling worthless after years of the bullying, I never got over that, even with the help of therapy. And I still felt worthless inside. So I kept craving that external validation. I just wanted more, 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 and not for who I was, but for all that I did. I wanted to prove to the world that I was worthy. So with that, not only did I become cross country captain, I was a straight A student. I led student government. I was on yearbook. I was on photography club. I never let myself relax or sleep. And I wanted to be so good at cross country that I never went to parties, which maybe was a good thing, maybe not at the time. I never drank. I never experimented or experienced weed, or any of those other drugs. I never even put desserts in my body or enriched flour or anything that diet culture today deems as bad. And we'll talk about that more in the second half of this episode, just because that dives into more of like my eating disorder background, but more to come on that. Point being, the competition was me versus me, and I couldn't be second best at anything. I had to be the absolute best. So my anxiety and my panic attacks didn't get any better during this time until I got into FSU and I was standing on that campus, deciding very quickly after summer training with FSU cross country that I did not want to run in college. I was burnt out from running. I had put my heart and soul into it, and I didn't realize how much harder it was going to be in college. I mean, it was going to be a full-time job on top of classes. And I had worked so hard to get into a fun college that honestly, I didn't want to work that hard anymore. I wanted to party now. I wanted to relax. I wanted to have a social life. And I decided running in college wasn't for me. So guess what I did? I dedicated the first 2 years of college to partying. I experienced drinking, me joining a sorority, and in that sorority, unfortunately, I was subject to hazing and bullying, so it wasn't what I had typically imagined. That was just another part of my story. And again, I don't think my parents knew the extent of that either. So by the time of my junior year, after studying abroad in Italy and falling in love with travel and realizing that I wanted to travel in the future, and if I wanted to travel in the future, I had to get my shit together, I dropped my sorority and I joined an honors program at my college. At the same time, I was dating a guy who took Adderall for ADHD. I had been put on ADHD medications in elementary school, but I very quickly got off of them just because of how they made me feel. It was a lot for a third grader. I felt like a zombie. I felt very on edge and I didn't know what was happening. So my parents didn't keep me on them for long. But this time was different. I felt like a superhuman, and papers that used to take me 3 to 4 hours to complete were taking me 1 to 2, like they were taking my other classmates. So I felt like this was putting me on an even playing field as my classmates, to where I didn't have to work as hard as I've been working my whole life to get things done. And while the Adderall made my schoolwork easier, my anxiety, it was so bad, and I had the worst insomnia. But even so, I asked my psychiatrist for a prescription and she gave it to me, no questions asked. With the anxiety, I just turned 21 at the time, and my psychiatrist offered to put me on Xanax or some other form of medication to take away the anxiety as I was taking the Adderall. But for me, I was done partying, but I really liked wine, and I had just tasted some really good wines in Italy. So I was like, oh, I'll just keep a bottle of wine in my room and I'll just have a glass of wine before bed while I'm doing my papers, like a little nightcap. Because I was a resident assistant at FSU. So obviously I couldn't get sloshed. I had to be very alert in order to be there to keep my students safe, because every night, yes, something happened every night. It's FSU. If you don't know anything about FSU, it's a major party school. Stuff happens. But with that, I was allowed to have wine in the dorms because I was of age. And that's their policy at FSU. You just have to be of age to have alcohol in the dorms. So I would have one glass of wine. It wasn't doing much. It was just putting me to sleep. But then also I realized that when I was going out on the weekends, when I started drinking, I couldn't stop drinking. And I realized that that might be an issue. But I didn't really have time to address that before COVID hit in 2020. And that's where I'll leave you because this goes more into the second half. I say the second half of my life, it really feels like that. The last 5 years were just insane, but this goes into the juiciest part of my life as I exit college and get into adulthood. So that's where I'll leave you. And with that, I do feel comfortable sharing my story today, or at least I feel less ashamed because as you'll see in the next episode, I've overcome so much since then that my past is really just an afterthought to me today. I have to do some really hard work to recall most of my past. And I also want to share this with you so that you see where I'm coming from and you know that there is one professional daughter, sister, girlfriend, human out there who has been through the ringer and lived somehow by the grace of God to tell this tale. But you're not alone. I see you and I care enough about you to speak publicly on this today while accepting the consequences that people might look at me differently after this, for better or for worse. And I'm okay with that. That is the cost of being vulnerable and sharing openly on sensitive topics in order to change this narrative. But yeah, that's what I have for you today. Thank you for listening. And as always, be well.